Robert Bob Osgood is known in Danvers as a retired 30-year firefighter, a loving father and husband, and a lifelong volunteer. Osgood was honored at the Danvers Town Hall on November 29th for his 55 years of service as a town meeting member. Andrea Daley, the event coordinator, said this.
We're going to be celebrating in a very short amount of time Bob Osgood, who is a volunteer and has been a volunteer for 55 years. And we're doing this mainly because we're going to be celebrating the spirit of volunteerism. And Bob epitomizes volunteerism in the 55 years, and most of his volunteerism came after he had the stroke. He had a massive stroke in 1989, 1 year and 4 months after he retired from the fire department. And it shows that people can volunteer in any age group, physical condition, and that's what makes Danvers the town it is.
The Toomey Room in the Danvers Town Hall was filled with Danvers faces. Through Osgood's 55 years of service, he touched many people's lives as well as affected the outcome of many town meetings with his solid statements to the board. Pat Frazier, the current Danvers Town Moderator and former Board of Selectmen Chair, stated this about Osgood.
And I learned a tough lesson when I was chairman of the Board of Selectmen. We were debating for the first time the Danversport slip fees. And town meeting member Bob Osgood get up and ask a question that I was not fully prepared to answer. And so based on those seeds of doubt, it went down in flames. And as I said to Bob tonight, you really I learned the very valuable lesson that when town meeting member Bob Osgood speaks, everybody listens.
Osgood's spirit of volunteerism reached further than the Danvers town lines. State Representative Teddy Speliotis presented Osgood with a letter of resolution, which required 3 votes and a formal vote on the floor. Speliotis stated this about Osgood.
For 6 or 7 years I served as the moderator. All that time you were in Precinct 7. You always had that end seat. You always stood up. And to me, if there was just one word to describe you, it was solid. Just absolutely solid. When you stood up, you were solid as a rock. And that's why other people would get up and they would kind of hem or they would be concerned, but never you. You stood up, whether it was even just a count to find out the count for that day or taking the attendance, you were solid. And I'm also glad that Pat Frazier mentioned the fact that you overturned the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen. You know what? Because that really is the foundation of government. It's a checks and balance system. We're all supposed to volunteer, but we're occasionally supposed to disagree. And we're supposed to disagree in a very good way about it. And this room fills up tonight for you, for not just the volunteering part, but for the ability to put in that time and to be able to stand up and speak your mind when you've wanted to say something. We know that nothing is going to hold you back.
Bill Clark, current chairman of the Board of Selectmen, honored Osgood with a letter of recognition. Clark said this about his neighbor and longtime friend.
But also, he and I served many years ago together on the Bicentennial Committee, and he was a very integral part of that committee. Besides forming the Alarm List Company, he did the commemorative coin that we coined at that time. That was his project for it, but I worked with him in the Conservation Commission some, and his haunted house. Bob was just an unbelievable, commensurate volunteer. I like to call him the little curmudgeon of the town meeting also. Great friend, longtime friend.
Osgood's 30-year firefighting career was highlighted by Fire Chief Kevin Farrell.
But I did talk to a couple of your co-workers in the past couple of days. And they provided me with some insight on your 30 years on the job. And unlike what I've heard here tonight about how excitable you can be on the town meeting floor, they said just the opposite about you in the fire service. That when you were confronted with a situation that needed to be dealt with, you did it very calm, very cool, and very collected. And you were, always knew what needed to be done and got the job done. And one of the incidents that I was informed of today when I spoke with this Dick Wessel, as a matter of fact. It was the Your Market fire. Your Market, you were the acting captain then. Yeah. You were the acting captain, and he says he remembers distinctly you as you pulled up, you got on the radio, and he said, "You better call the chief."
Longtime friend Richard Trask, the town archivist, compared Osgood to the Endicott pear tree, resilient and iconic. He offered these thoughts about his friend.
Last summer, I had to give a talk at Endicott College for the Endicott Family Association on the Endicott pear tree. And I called my talk, "It takes a licking but keeps on ticking." The Endicott pear tree was planted in sometime in the 1630s in Danvers, that time Salem, and it went through an awful lot. It was with a large orchard, and all of that orchard is gone except for the Endicott pear tree. Cows used it as a scratch post. The big hurricane of 1817, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, came through and decimated New England. Hurricane Carol and Diane in the 1950s. One of my classmates in the 1960s decided it would be a fun thing to cut all of the branches off the tree. And in 1964, it looked like the tree was doomed. But it kept on ticking. And when I was talking about that, I was thinking, that sounds a little bit like someone I know. I wrote something about Bob Osgood, and I want to just read a little bit of it.
Yes, please.
I believe that Bob is the consummate example of the American citizen volunteer who, over the span of his adult life, has devoted so much of his time to numerous Danvers civic, governmental, and educational organizations. He is scrupulously honest, ever with a pixie smile, and his often crusty words belie a gentle compassion for the underdog and those who need a voice. What has most impressed and taught me in recent times about Bob and his character is that following a severe stroke, which lesser men would have taken as an excuse to cut back on volunteer efforts, he has, with some physical discomfort, continued to actively serve the town which he holds so dear. Now, I didn't write this today or yesterday. I wrote that 21 years ago, in 1990, when I thought, boy, how much longer does Bob have?
Along with Trask, Osgood was one of the founding members of the Alarm List Company, a battle reenactment group. Dave McKenna and other members of the Alarm List Company arrived in period dress to honor Osgood.
Bob and I met back in 1974, and he and Dick Trask put out a call to arms to form a recreated militia so we could celebrate properly the bicentennial of these United States of America. Several of us turned out, and we formed that militia. He took on the persona of Jonathan Goodall, who had lost an eye in the Battle of Snowshoes during the French and Indian War. You may remember Bob always had a hunting frock and an eye patch to portray that person. I was called Bob Cousin because I took the persona of Eleazar Goodale, who was from my side of town. In 1975, we started doing our first events, and one of the first was the infamous march to Arlington, then known Menotomy, reenacting the march that Danvers men had made 20 miles to fight the British, who had gone to try to capture rounds in Concord. We heard they were heading back to Boston, and we cut them off in Arlington, then known as Menotomy. It was a 20-mile march. Bob was the oldest of the group at that time, twice as old as most of the rest of us, and he made it. We all made it, I think, but we were sold the next day. Then in 77, we did it again up in Hubbardton, Vermont. Recreated the retreat of the American troops in front of the British advancing on us. 20 miles through the mountains, a 95-degree temperature in the shade, and there wasn't much shade. Again, Bob, being the oldest one in the group, led the charge most of the way, and the last half of it was all uphill. The last quarter mile was approximately a 1-to-1 slope. Bob made it to the top of that before any of us young fellas.
Behind every great volunteer is an even greater spouse to support them. Josie stated this about her marriage.
I will say that we've had
Go ahead and do that if you want.
almost a perfect marriage.
I was a friend of Mark's before he became elected.
Because he did what he liked to do, and I did what I liked.
He got voted down twice. He got elected to
And we always go home. And with the 4 kids, we've been happy.
Josie wanted to express her love and admiration in a song to her husband that brought tears to the audience's eyes.
Stars all say you're mine forever and never part. I only live for your love and your kiss.
Osgood's long list of credentials is only eclipsed by his dedication to his community and his unwavering ability to surmount life's obstacles. In the spirit of volunteerism, we honor Robert Osgood. Thank you for your service.
Good evening, folks out there that are watching this interview. We're going to be interviewing a person that most of you people do already know. His name is Robert G. Osgood, and he has served on many boards in the town of Danvers, some of which were the Conservation Commission, the Danvers Bicentennial Committee, the Historic District Commission, Rebecca Nurse House Caretaker, founding member of the Danvers Alarm List Company, and there are so many other things that he has volunteered for. And this program and this whole presentation is going to be the honoring of the spirit of volunteerism. And Bob is the prime example of volunteering to the town of Danvers. Without our volunteer members in the town would not be the town it is. And Bob has the ultimate distinction at this particular time of serving as a town meeting member for 55 years. He was an elected town meeting member for 55 years, and he's still going. And he is the longest-serving member of the town of Danvers in the town's history. And I was doing some research on town meeting and town meeting members, and I found that fact out, and I was astounded at the fact that he has put in 55 years. He hasn't been defeated in all the time that he has run for this elected office. And I went to the town manager, Wayne Marquis, and spoke to him about having an event to recognize the spirit of volunteerism, and Bob deserves that honor. And at this portion, would like to go over Bob's life in a capsule and some of the other things that he has done. We're going to be starting with a picture of Bob as a youngster. And he's sitting in a chair. And how old do you think you are in that picture, Bob?
About a year, I would say.
And where did you live at this particular time?
My mother and father, when they were married, bought a home here in Danvers, a brand new house. It was 11 Gould Street. I lived there until I was married in 1955, then I moved away. So all my childhood life was spent at 11 Gould Street.
Did you have any siblings?
I have one brother, Dick, who was born in 1934, and right now he's in Florida.
And the next picture here that we have that encapsulates your life is a picture of you in the Highlands Horrible Parade?
Yes, yeah. That was taken shortly after I had the stroke. And I just did it as a lark. I tell everybody, no matter what your problems are, don't give up.
And when did this stroke happen?
My stroke happened a year and 2 months after I retired from the fire department in 1989. I retired in January of 1987 from the fire department.
How long did you
I worked in the fire department for 30 years.
And we also have a picture of you standing with your brother Dick. He also joined the force. I remember him from an annual fireman's ball and an annual policeman's ball.
That's right.
And Dick had to be the best polka dancer that I've ever met. You?
I was. I'm the best polka dancer.
Is that where you met your wife?
No. I met my wife, believe it or not, down the post office. Oh. At the time, I was working here in town, and I went down to the post office to pick up the mail, and she was working at Hot Wat, and she was going to pick up the mail. And at the time, Hot Wat was right across the street from where I lived at 11 Gold Street. And so I used to see her every day. Eventually, I asked her out, and just went on from there. And my first gift to her was a 9-pound pollock. A 9-pound pollock fish. And she brought it home, and her mother said to her, "What the heck am I supposed to do with this?"
Because they had to cut it up with the scales and everything?
They cut it up and use it for chowder, because it was what they call is soft white fish.
It sounds like a very romantic gift.
Oh, it was. At least I thought it was.
And it shows, I know that your brother and yourself, in this picture, you're both in uniform. Did you both serve at the same fire station at any one period?
No. Yes, we did, but on different shifts. We were never on the same shift. The chief made sure we were on opposite shifts.
And you also, with your brother, were a co-owner of the Spike
Bridge Boatyard. And we bought that. We owned that for 15 years. And that was down on Liberty Street.
Do you remember the history of the Spike Bridge?
Spike Bridge was built back in the colonial days as a spiked bridge. The farmers used to have to go across the Salem-Beverly Bridge, and they decided to make some money, they were going to charge them a toll. So they changed the way they went across. They built Spike Bridge. That's why they call it. They built a bridge across that river in spite of the people on the other end, so they didn't have to pay any tolls.
You mentioned that you had the pollock that you gave as a sweetheart gift, so to speak.
Yeah.
And the other part, it shows your family that they'll be posting up, and it shows your family here in front of
11 Gold Street.
11 Gold Street with your parents. Would you tell us a little bit about that picture?
Well, my children were all young at the time, and of course my son was the firstborn, and then I had 3 daughters after that. My first son has passed away now.
What are their names?
Well, it was David, Roberta, Joanna, and Joyce.
Very nice. And it shows them in what?
Well, I think that was Easter Sunday morning.
I think so, too.
By the looks of it, it was Easter Sunday, and I think we were heading out of church at the time.
In this picture here that they'll be pulling up, it shows your last day on the
Yeah,
force.
that was the last night I worked at the fire station. And it was myself on top, and then David, Roberta, and Joyce.
And Joyce.
Yeah, Joanna was not there. I think she was sick at the time.
Was she? And then very shortly, about a year later, year and some odd months, you had the stroke.
When I was working on the fire department in 1955, my captain was Phil Davis. And he challenged me one time. He said, "I dare you to run for a town meeting member." So I did, and here I am.
Wow.
I'm still a town meeting member.
What do you find about the town meeting and the town meeting body, our system of government? Because a lot of people have indicated... It's
interesting.
It is interesting.
To me, it's interesting.
Me too. But a lot of people think that Danvers is big enough to be a city.
It probably is.
And we don't want to, a lot of people don't want to see that happen.
No.
And could you tell, I know my reasons why I would like to keep the town as a town.
The way the town is set up, there's more people making the decisions and you get a broader input from the people than you do like a city of Salem or Peabody or Beverly. There they have city councilors, what are it, five people?
Correct, yeah.
Make all the decisions. Here, it's over 100 people making the decisions. So, in my way of thinking, we're better off staying the way we are.
I was researching another project, and this came up it popped up that you had been serving 55 years. That is a tremendous amount of time.
I didn't even know it. I didn't even realize how long I had been there.
Well, I found that out, and I went to him with that piece of information, and he was astounded also. So we wanted to spotlight you, but in a way spotlight the whole spirit of volunteerism.
Well, it's a good way of getting to know how the town actually functions, all the background. If you don't get involved in it, you don't realize how much work is involved in running the town and doing all the different things to keep the town going the way it is. And it's a good town.
When Wayne had heard the news of your 55 years, he was astounded also. And we wanted to bring this up now to spotlight you for all of this work. When we had increased the size of our precincts from 18 town meeting, from 15 to 18 town meeting members, and changed the boundaries, you found that you were outside of your boundaries. So do you want to tell me that story?
Well, we started off in precinct 2. Then I moved to Forest Street in precinct 7.
Yes.
Then I went from precinct 7. I went back to precinct 2 when we went over the Rebecca Nurse House. Now we've moved to the LLA housing project on Holton Street. So we're back in precinct 2 again. So I've been going back and forth all the time between the two precincts.
Right, and not only that, but each time that you went back and forth, people had enough trust in your determination and your decisions. You always won.
Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Which is good. It's
well,
a good tribute.
You get it. You're not looking for it, but you get the exposure.
Correct.
By being, your name is brought up in decisions made by different committees that are on, and thus your name is before the public more, and they just say, well, he's interested, and they just keep voting for you. So and you get to be known.
Yes, you do. The other thing is that when one volunteers for anything, there's so much that you learn from that particular. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, take the Conservation Commission I know more about than anything. And there's so much to learn as far as different committees are concerned. Like I believe that the Conservation Commission is one of the toughest ones, as well as the Board of Appeals. The Board of Appeals is really tough for all the different things you have to know about
correct.
That.
Zoning, correct.
As far as the Conservation Commission is concerned, they're forever getting more rules and regulations handed to you that you had no part in establishing. The federal government, the state, the state's conservation outfit, plus your own doings, they keep handing you stacks of paper saying, "Yeah, you got to do this. This is the way we're going to operate now. This is the way you're going to operate now," and you continually churn it over, more information, and then they just add one layer on top of another, and they don't disregard the bottom layer.
Right.
It's still part of it. So there's a tremendous amount of stuff, background knowledge that people on these departments do have to learn to be able to be good town meeting members.
And serving on those boards, you get to know other people in town and their personalities.
But the problem with town meeting, you don't get to know the people because you only see them once a year.
Basically.
And that's only for a short period of time. And you can talk to them before during the break in the middle and afterwards. But that's only a matter of a few hours a year.
Correct.
You never get to know them unless you meet them at the other meetings.
But the whole thing of it is they control the whole purse
Yes.
strings.
Yeah.
They're the ones that, no matter what goes on, whatever the town manager wants, fire chief, police chief, department heads, it's the town meeting body that says okay.
Has the final say.
Has the final say.
But who has a lot of say is the finance committee.
Finance committee.
Finance
right.
committee.
My husband has served on the finance
Yes,
committee
he
now
has.
17 years.
I think that the finance committee, each member of the finance committee gets different
perspective.
departments to look at.
Yes, they do.
And they get a stack. They get a stack of information that sometimes is, say, 10 inches high. They have to sit and go through all these figures after figures after figures. God. How they do it, I don't know.
And this is all for free.
Yes, it's all for free.
All for free.
Volunteer.
All volunteers. And
it's a heck of a lot of fun.
It is. And then I'm going to shift on this to your military service, because at the time that you were eligible, we didn't have the draft.
No,
we didn't. It was a quiet time.
I was never actually in the military. I was in the reserve.
Yes.
And I was in the reserve for 8 years. And I was in the submarine service down in Salem,
yes.
down at 111.
You were a torpedo man.
Yeah, I was torpedo man 3rd class. To be qualified for the submarines is a lot of study, a lot of things you have to know every nook and cranny of the submarine and every valve, what it does and everything else in the whole boat. And they're called boats, not ships. So there's a lot of work.
Did that ever go out into the waters with you people on it?
No. They were out of service. They were strictly for training. The boats in the submarine reserve are strictly as training vessels. They're no longer in actual service. We went once a year down to New London, Connecticut for 2 weeks training.
I see.
And you went out to sea for the 2 weeks.
That's what I was driving at.
Yeah, you went out to sea on an active boat while you were down in New London. And we were operating as a target vessel. They were developing new sound equipment.
All right, so you were the hunted.
We were the hunted.
Okay.
And they tell us to go down to a certain depth and turn on one piece of equipment to see what the sounds, how much sound would come from that piece of equipment. And so they were doing 2 things. They were testing their new equipment, sound equipment, and they were also testing how to lessen the sound from the device that was operating.
What if a person really served on a sub? If they really served on it, do they have to go through some psychological testing?
They might now, but they didn't back then. When I was in the reserve, we didn't have to. But they might have to now, where they have the atomic subs and they stay at sea below the surface for so long a period of time, and they would stay below the surface for months on end. So the profession has changed.
And this is a picture when they do put it up of you as a movie star.
Oh yeah, movie star.
But would you please talk about this? I thought this was fascinating.
That was over the movie 3 Sovereigns for Sarah. Sarah being Sarah Cloyce, who was Rebecca Nurse's sister. Rebecca Nurse had 2 sisters, Sarah Cloyce and Mary Estes. And Mary Estes and Rebecca Nurse were hung during the witchcraft hysteria period as witches. Sarah Cloyce was accused, but never hung.
Who was the actress that played that?
Vanessa Redgrave.
I have a copy of that, and it's a
good movie.
It is a good movie because it's so realistic of what people lived like at that particular time, and the absolute turmoil that Sarah went through.
Well, that movie, all the spoken parts were very, very accurate in that movie.
Was she imprisoned in Ipswich?
Yes, she was. Actually, they put her in a converted duck blind out on the salt marshes in Ipswich.
And
I believe. I'm not positive of that, but I believe that's what it was.
I saw that scene in which, and of course, if you've got a salt marsh, we're talking about horseflies, greenheads, and it zeroed in on her in this most pitiful state. What was the significance of the three sovereigns?
The three sovereigns was, after the witchcraft hysteria period was over, she petitioned the Great and General Court for compensation for the loss of her two sisters in the time she was in prison. And they gave her 3 sovereigns, which is English money, so they named the movie 3 Sovereigns for Sarah. That's where the name came from.
One of the other things that we had discussed too was that what your part was in this movie.
Well, my part in the movie is funny. I was just standing, leaning against the fence, work on Giles Corey. Giles Corey was pressed to death, not hung. And they were going to pile the rocks on top of Giles Corey, and they needed somebody to lug the rocks. So I was leaning against the fence, and the movie director says, "Come here." So that was I was just standing there, and that's how I got in the movie.
Where would that be in today's geography? Where would that be? Would that be on the road to Salem, like somewhere on North Street?
No, where they did where they actually did it?
Yes, for Giles Corey.
I was always told it was done in the old parking lot, which is now a city-owned parking lot in Salem. It used to be Albie's parking lot.
Oh, really?
That's what
on Norman Street.
That's what I was told. Yes, the movie scene was actually taken on the Rebecca Nurse Homestead property.
And you were at one time the caretaker of the Rebecca Nurse house.
My wife and I were caretakers there for close to 15 years.
It's a long time.
It is the most interesting job I think that I've ever had. Why? Because you get to talk to people from all over the world. And believe me, they come from all over the world. I think the most interesting person I talked to, believe it or not, was an Eskimo.
A real Eskimo?
Real Eskimo.
From America? Or from
she lived up above the Arctic Circle.
Really?
Yeah, and she was going to college in Alaska, and she was studying history. And so she came down, and we sat and talked for an hour and a half on how to store food in the wintertime, how they stored food and how we would have stored food.
And so you were, as the caretaker, you were also the person that would show the property to visitors.
Yeah, and then if I saw anybody out walking around, I'd go out and start talking with them. Just recently, I happened to drive up there, and there was an elderly man, all alone. And so I started talking to him, and I asked him why he was there. And he said, "I came to see the sundial." I said, "You came from England to see the sundial?" He says, "Yes." He says, "I came to see the sundial, so somebody told me it was a very odd sundial." And I says, "Well, yes, come thinking about it, it is. How many sundials have you seen that are vertical?" Not many.
Not many.
None. But the sundial at the Rebecca Nurse house is vertical. It's on the south-facing side of the Nurse homestead, but it only tells time till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon because the sun gets too far west, and the shadow of the corner of the house stops it from telling time.
Did you have special quarters in that Rebecca Nurse house?
Yes, the Caretakers Quarters are part of the one of the additions to the homestead. The homestead, as you see it today, has had 1, 2, 3, 4 additions from the real house. The summer kitchen was added on. Then they put on an addition in 1740. Then the 1850 edition, which is basically the Caretakers Quarters, and part of the 1740 edition is also. The 1850 edition, they believe, was a freestanding structure somewhere else on that property and moved and attached to it. Because as we got nosing around inside, in the real interior of the homestead, there's outside siding on 2 sides, on touching each other.
Okay.
between the 1740 and 1850 section. So we believe that part was, 1850 section was moved onto it.
The Danvers Alarm List owns that property, doesn't it?
Yes.
How large was that Rebecca Nurse farm?
Originally, it was 300 acres, and now it's down to 17.
Were farms at this particular time, were they self-sustaining with?
They had to be.
With dairy.
I mean, they had no supermarkets.
No, they did. Obviously.
No.
But
no McKinnons.
No McKinnons. But they did they have their own herd of cows? And in other words,
they would have had probably 2 or 3 cows, because they didn't know how to store milk. They didn't learn till later on that they'd put the milk down into the well in the cold water, that it would last longer. So they'd only have 2 or 3 cows, but they'd have chickens, turkeys, geese, rabbits, all the things like that, pigs.
Sheep. We saw the spinning wheel.
Yeah, sheep, and they'd have the sheep for the wool.
For the wool. And then the looms, we saw that.
Yeah.
To make your own clothing.
Yeah, linen.
So they had to depend upon their family. That's probably why the families were so large.
Farms.
So large.
Yeah.
To be able to become a community. Now, where would that nearest neighbor to the Rebecca house be? Because the farms are each farm.
Probably about 700 feet away.
700.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit. But you also lived in an older house on Forest Street.
The house we lived on Forest Street was built in 1700. Moved into a brand new house. I mean, we had it built. And then I happened to see this house that I always liked on Forest Street. I saw a for sale sign on it. So I went home and got my wife and said, I'm going to show you a new house. So we went over and pulled in the driveway. My wife looked at the house and she said, "You got to be kidding me." So, but we lived there for 32 years.
It's a beautiful house.
It's a beautiful house.
It's still on Forest Street near St. Richard's Church. It's brown and it's very old looking.
Yeah.
It's in great repair.
Right next door to St. Richard's Church. It was a great house to live in. Like the front room in the house on the second floor became our 3 daughters' bedroom. Well, how can you put 3 daughters in one bedroom? Well, most people don't realize, but that bedroom was 24 feet long and 17 feet wide.
Wow.
Which is a big room.
Were there any closets?
I built closets inside. I built a closet in that room, and I was real proud of myself. So I had Josie, my wife, come up upstairs and see the closet that I built. So she came up and looked at the closet. Oh, that's nice, and this, that, and the other. It'd be good for the kids. And so as she got out of the room, I tore it down.
Why?
Why? Because it was vertical, and the rest of the house was on an angle. It didn't look right, so I tore it down. And I built the closet back up on the angle the house is leaning to, because the house leans.
Yes, it does.
Because from the wind.
It does.
The wind. They always lean to the east, because we have prevailing westerly winds.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
and a lot of those houses faced due south.
Yeah, that one faced the front of that house facing
Does the
due
Rebecca
south.
Nurse house face south
It
also?
It faced due south. Yep.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
And then the back was always at a slant to minimize
They always move to the
wind.
Actually, all the time, the steady pressure of the wind makes them move. And that house was like, when we redid the downstairs in one of the rooms, you started at the bottom of the room and put down the sill, we right up tight. When we did the room in the house, the top part of the room up at the ceiling was 6 inches off. 6 inches off a plumb.
The question I wanted to ask you, you've lived in 2 older houses. Have you, and there had been previous people that lived there for centuries.
Oh, yeah.
In those houses. Now, the Rebecca Nurse house, did her descendants live there? Or
oh, yeah.
It was...
Oh, yeah. They did not go out of the Nurse family until, I believe it was 1890.
That's quite a year.
They lived it for a long time. It stayed within the family. And lo and behold, a Putnam married into the Nurse family, and the Putnams bought the property. Of course, the Putnams were the main accusers. during the witchcraft Syria period.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
And Putnam. I love listening to stories like this because when do you hear it? You only hear it in grade 4.
Yeah.
And and I always felt that this my philosophy is that if we're going to be educating these youngsters, all these youngsters that belong to this town, they should have some knowledge of the town itself for when they go someplace else or to college. Not saying I come from Danvers and that has malls in it.
Yeah.
There's so much history here in this town because it goes back to pre-revolutionary times.
Yep.
You've lived in 2 old houses all these years. Have you ever felt that there was a presence of former owners or former people that have lived there? Have you ever felt?
Haven't. I have not. I have not.
Has anybody in your family felt?
Yes. My middle daughter, Joanna, at one time she was playing in the front hall.
Of which house?
Of the house on Forest Street.
Forest Street.
And my wife came around the corner looking for her. And she said, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm playing with my friend." And my wife said, "There's no one else here." She said, "Oh, she comes and goes."
Also, too, in your spirit of volunteerism, we talked about the Danvers Alarm List.
Yeah.
That comes under the auspices of Richard Trask.
Well.
Or did you found that on your own?
No. Dick came up with the idea.
I see.
And he's drifted away from it now, but it still goes on.
But you have an alter ego.
Well, I did.
Who is your alter ego?
My alter ego was Jonathan Goodall, who was the native of Danvers. He fought in the Battle of Snowshoes, and he was an older member of the original Alarm List Company.
I see.
Because the Battle of Snowshoes was in 1757.
So that would be the French.
Yeah, it's a big, right in the French and Indian War.
French and Indian War.
It's part of it.
Yes.
And the Battle of the Snowshoes was done up on the Lake Champlain, is where it actually was, up towards the Canadian border. And they fought a battle with the French and the Indians. And the forces from this country of Britain were defeated. They started out with 180 people involved in the battle from the British side, plus volunteers. And Jonathan Goodall was one of the volunteers. And he got shot. Actually, he didn't get shot. He was behind a tree, from what I could gather, what I could figure out. And the musket ball hit the side of the tree, and a piece of the wood or bark went into his eye. That's why he wore the eye patch. Yeah. And blinded him. And he was one of, I think there was only 30 survivors in that battle.
Wow.
And he eventually found his way, managed to get back by himself. He was by himself because everybody had evacuated the area, and they didn't find the Indians, and the French didn't find him because he was in a snowbank being at the base of the tree, and they just didn't find him. And eventually, when he came to, he made him his way back to the lake and went down the lake on the ice back to Fort Ticonderoga.
All right, and you had also mentioned to me one other time that we were talking about how you had, with the Alarm List Company, you had walked to Arlington, or at that time it was called Menotomy.
Menotomy, yeah, where when the British were retreating from Lexington and Concord back to Boston, the group from Danvers here was told to go to Menotomy and intercept them on their way back.
I see.
And they were trapped in the battle there. They were trapped in the house, and we actually walked.
How long did that take you?
Too long.
Too long, but it was a long walk.
A fair long walk, yeah.
And who made these costumes? Obviously they're hand done.
There was a lady here in Danvers who made all the we don't call them costumes.
All right, I'm sorry.
The clothing.
The clothing at the time. Well,
Yeah.
that would have to have all been done by hand.
Yes, they were. They still are. All the clothing the Alarm List Company makes, even today, you can purchase them, but that's all handmade, even though they're purchased.
You also when with the Alarm List, you had gone to 2 other countries.
Well, we went to England and we went to Paris. We went to Paris. In Paris, we were there in 1983. And I'll ask you folks a question. Why would we have been in Paris in 1983?
And those are joyful occasions, and the spirit of volunteerism has given you an insight that you would not have had.
Oh, that's true. That's true. And when we went to Paris, it was a great time. We spent 10 days in Paris, 10 days. And we went to every blasted museum and historic place within a day's drive of Paris. Why? Who was my roommate? Dick Trask, naturally. He was a great one to be with because he had researched everything about it, so he knew where we were going, what we were going to do. He had the itinerary planned, and he finally said the last day, I said, "Where are we going today, Dick?" He said, "We're going to the airport. I'm exhausted from going." So we've done a lot of things.
Yes, you have.
And one thing we haven't mentioned, remember the haunted house?
Oh, all right, the haunted house. Please give that final, because I remember that.
The haunted house we did at the house on Forest Street. And we did that for the benefit of the Danvers YMCA swim team, because my son swam on the swim team. And believe it or not, and we used to run it Saturday and Sunday nights. And the last year that we ran it, we had over 3,500 people go through the house in 2 nights. And they're coming through the whole house, from the cellar, not including the attic, to the 1st and 2nd floor, but to every room in the house. It was very, very interesting. And all the characters in that house were all volunteer.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. And all of the money went to
the Danvers YMCA swim team.
Swim team. But you've certainly been a custodian of 2 beautiful buildings, older buildings, and lent your charm to them and your protection to them.
Oh, my charm, yeah.
Yes,
my charm.
No, definitely your charm. Plus your wife. Your wife is a very...
Don't forget her.
I'm not going to, because for every volunteer, there's a wife that's willing to stay at home and do for the person that's volunteering. There's always one that is in the backdrop, but that person in the backdrop is just as important as the volunteer.